Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us on another fabulous day for our February 2021 Coffee and CEU event from the DBA SIG. Today is going to be one that a lot of people have requested for, so I really hope you're all as excited as me. But before we get to that, we do have some of those housekeeping items. So this event is being recorded and it's going to be uploaded into our DBA page after the event. If you are here for CEUs, please listen up. We are actually changing up the process slightly this month. I'm going to be sending out a Google form where you can sign in and out, and the sign in will be sent to you right after I finish my spiel over here. And you have to complete the sign in within 5 minutes from the end of my spiel to be eligible for your CEUs. And the same process is going to happen at the end. So you'll have a sign up form that will be sent out before the end of the presentation. Make sure to sign yourself out within 5 minutes of that ending. And today's event is going to count for one BACB Type 2 Learning CE. And because of this new process, there's not going to be that survey. However, we're still going to be monitoring your attendance, so please stay on for its entirety. If you have any connection issues and get logged out, just shoot us an email to make sure we can document all of that. Since we are monitoring the attendance, please make sure that your full name is displayed on Zoom just so that we know who you are. And if you're logging in through a phone, just go ahead and email us at disseminateaba@gmail.com with the phone number used, your full name and email. And do not worry, I'm going to send all this info through the chat. Do not worry. So during the presentation, we would love it if you could keep your cameras on, but it's okay, no pressure at all. The chat is always open, so go ahead, feel free to comment, ask any questions that you may have. And if you can, just mute yourself just to help limit the background noise. And lastly, if you have been to any of our previous CEU events, you remember me babbling on about the DBA fundraiser for a dissemination grant. We're going to have some exciting news about this very soon. But in the meantime, our fundraiser is still on. So if you want some DBA swag, I'll be linking our fundraising page and website in the chat. So go ahead and check them out. Okay, so I think you all are probably tired of listening to me ramble on. So let's get on to the main event. Today, we get the fantastic opportunity to learn from our very own DBA SIG chair, Dr. John O'Neill. So they are all yours, John. John, any issues on your end?
Yeah, the audio is skipping. Can you hear me okay?
It's great on my side.
Oh, okay. It might just be on my end then. So shall I just get started? Okay. All right. So this talk, and just let me know if there are any audio or video issues. This talk will cover police and behavioral science, and it's going to be a rundown of the applied research and applications that myself and my company have endeavored in the last few years. So I'll start out with research in police academy training. We conducted a series of studies at 3 different academies across the US. I'll give you some general takeaways from those studies and how we applied the principles of behavioral science during those studies. I'll talk about some developing areas of research or potential areas of research where I feel behavior analysts have a lot to offer and might be able to make a substantial impact in the fields of law enforcement. And then I'll talk about some developing areas of practice that we've engaged in, 2 of them being expert witness testimony, and the second being curriculum development and improvements with New York State. And that's our most recent endeavor. So this all sort of came out of the 2015 Presidential Task Force on 21st Century Policing. What they recommended was federal funding for regional training facilities to promote consistent standards for high quality training and rigorous training practices that were evidence-based. So taking that, we wanted to find out from observation and experience the current sort of situation in police academy training. What do the results look like? Are they using behavioral principles? And what can we expect the cadets to learn coming out of the police academies? So based on some previous literature that looked at the basic content and layout of police academies, they, on average, across the nation, have 168 hours of training. 60 of those pertain to defensive and control tactics, which were the topic of our studies. However, there's no real consensus on the most effective training strategies. There's a lot of variation. Every academy does it a little bit differently, at least in our experience. And there's a lot of divergence in the actual training procedures, and that's likely due to a lack of training-related applied research in police academies. As far as we know, our research studies were the first objective analysis of police academy training in the research literature. So what we do know about police academy training is that they do have skill proficiency exams in about 93% of academies. However, there's no evidence of standardized or objective measurements in those proficiency exams. And any prior research involves subjective measurements. So they use things like 5-point Likert scales, which give you a general idea of the performance, but there hadn't been any objective analysis of police academy training and the outcomes of that training. So there's a need for empirical evaluations to determine the effectiveness and also the efficiency, whether or not what they're doing is the most effective and most efficient way to go about teaching skills in the police academy. So our research, I'm just going to give you some basic takeaways from our research. If you're interested in learning more about the method and procedures and the nitty-gritty details, I presented that for the DBA sake about, I think it's over 2 years ago now, so you can go back and look at that episode if you want more details, or of course visit our website and download the articles themselves. But basically, we conducted 3 experiments at 3 police academies, one on the East Coast, one in the Central Time Zone, and one on the West Coast. And what we got out of the studies was about 10,000 videos that needed to be analyzed, which was a massive workload and a lot of data analysis that was conducted over the course of 20 to 30 site visits and took 3 years to complete. So some things to keep in mind as I show you this data. What is an acceptable mastery or passing criteria when teaching physical skills in police academy training? And what's an acceptable retraining period? How often should they go back in for retraining on either physical skills or knowledge-based skills? And do academies need more time and money? Can they do better with the resources that they have? Do they need more resources? Are they teaching too many skills? Keep these things in mind. Okay, so again, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of 2 of the studies because I think these are the most important. The first was conducted at a large regional academy in the Central Time Zone. So what regional means is all of the officers or potential officers across the state come to this one regional training facility. And then after the police academy training, they go back to their own towns, cities, departments, So it's sort of a central hub for all the training in that state. So this first study looks at the effect of the existing training. So we didn't make any modifications to the training other than introducing all of the objective measurement and task analyses involved in your typical behavior analytic applied research. So we looked at two skills. We looked at on top a pressure points manipulation, a physical skill, and on the bottom we looked at a disarming of a firearm skill. You got the sessions along the horizontal axis on the bottom. We've got the percentage of total steps completed correctly, and all of this data is an entire class of cadets. So we're not looking at an individual, we're looking at a class of about 25 cadets in this instance. So I'm going to show you the variability, the highs and the lows, and the average performance of the class of cadets. So we're not looking, again, we're not looking at an individual here. So when you look at these first three data points, we've got nice low baseline data. They don't know very much, they're just starting the academy, so performance is low, obviously. And the vertical line indicates when the initial training occurred. It's a single session of training. It took about 1 hour. And here is the initial effect. I'm just going to move my bar if I can here. No, maybe not. So the initial training effect brought the class on average up to about an 80%, which is where we set our criterion. But you can see that some are performing above that 80% level, some are performing below, but on average, they're right around that 80% mark. And when we did our follow-ups at 1, 2, 4, and 8 weeks, what we saw was, and you'll watch these blue boxes as they come up, what we saw was a gradual increase in the variability across 1, 2, 4, 4 and 8 weeks. And on the bottom here, we see a similar sort of effect, not as pronounced, but you can see that there are some very low performers in the class. And the academy trainers conducted a booster training. That's that final data point that brought them back above that 80% mark. So this is typical of police academy training. This is what they do every day. This is how they teach their skills. And what it suggests is that over the course of 8 weeks, those skills are going to deteriorate to the point that they require a retraining or a booster training. So I'll show you some general takeaways from study 3 now, which is where we gave some inputs, some performance feedback based on behavioral principles. We're going to use a similar sort of approach to their training. It's going to be a single session, and we're going to have follow-up to see if those skills maintain, and we're also going to provide some corrective feedback and performance feedback to not only to the cadets, but to the academy trainers themselves. I just want to pause to make sure the audio is working okay and everything. Okay, great. All right, so same thing, we've got our sessions or days on the horizontal axis. We've got our percentage of total steps completed correctly. This is a class of about 50 cadets, so it's a much larger class. And imagine 50 cadets in one gymnasium all learning the same skill at the same time. It's a pretty impressive thing to observe. So again, nice low baseline performance on those first few data points. And then you see the initial effect of training, but unlike the first study, not quite to that 80% mark. They're somewhere down in the 60 to 70% range on average. And they conducted a scenario-based training for the disarming skill on the top, which did have a nice effect pre and post. But again, as the weeks go on at 7 and 15 weeks, we see that variability start to increase, and we see a decreasing trend in the overall performance of the cadets on average. Again, this is a class of about 50 individuals. So you've got some high performers and you've got some really low performers, but at 15 weeks, there's a substantial decrease in the overall performance and proficiency of these skills. Same thing for the skill on the bottom, a little bit less pronounced, same as the first study. And at this point, the trainers asked us to give some feedback. So their training wasn't getting their class up to that 80% level where we would minimally like to see them. So they asked us to give some feedback on where we thought there were some areas where they could do some work and make some improvements. So what we did for the class of cadets was provide some objective performance feedback. So we provided them with video models of the skills that they were learning. We gave them the task analyses that we had developed, and we also included a visual task analysis. So with each step of this skill, there was also a visual of what that should look like. There were rotational arrows to show changes in direction, or directional arrows to show where the movement should go. And we also reviewed some of the critical steps that the trainers identified in these skills. So a lot of these skills have a step where if you miss that individual piece, the rest of the skill doesn't really matter because you've missed that critical step. So for example, with handcuffing, if you don't control the subject's hands, the rest of the skill doesn't matter because they're able to either wiggle out or break free from your control of their hands. So we provided all of this to the class of cadets. And then for the trainers themselves, there were 5 trainers involved in this study. We gave them a 1 hour of instruction on basic principles of behavior analysis or behavioral science with a heavy focus on how to provide corrective feedback and differential reinforcements and shaping. So we focused heavily on those 3 things because we felt that those were the areas where we could have the most impact for these trainers. So what effects did this have? Again, it's 1 hour of instruction and presentation. Looking at the trainer performance during the training sessions, we saw a large, almost 50% increase in the amount of time they spent providing corrective feedback on shaping and differential reinforcement. So this was a huge improvement in our eyes because the initial training involved much, much less. You can see around 10% of their time was spent providing feedback. And as behavior analysts, I'm sure that might be shocking. It was to us. So it was nice to see that massive increase in the amount of corrective feedback that they were providing after the performance feedback and instruction that we gave them. So let's look at the results on the actual performance of the cadets after this performance feedback. You can see for the skill on the top, it did bring them up to that 80% level. There's not a whole lot of variability within the box there. There are still some stragglers, but for the most part, the class is performing in or around that 80% mark that we would like them to be at. The same thing with a little bit more variability for the skill on the bottom. So this was really successful, and the trainers really felt like the 1 hour training that we gave them it sort of served as a refresher for them. You know, we get procedural drift. We know this with trainers over time, and I think it's just useful for them to have a reminder that we need to engage with the students. We need to reinforce what they're doing correctly and provide corrective feedback for the things that they're not doing correctly. Unfortunately, we see the same decreases and increase in variability across time during follow-up analysis. So what this data suggested was that a quarterly retraining is necessary for physical skills in police academy training. They asked us to come back and do the same thing with the next class for the disarming skill on the top. And you see a very similar results. And let me go back. Very similar results and very similar variability after that 1 hour training for the academy trainers. And the performance of the cadets was right around that 80% level, again, with not a whole lot of variability. So we were able to repeat this essentially with the next incoming class of cadets for these skills. All right, so I'm going to give just some basic takeaways and discuss a couple of things that we learned from these studies. I'm also going to silence my phone. All right, all set. So these studies were conducted at regional academies, and like I said, these are state academies where the officers come in from all over the states. They learn of these skills, and then they go back to their respective departments. So 3 different time zones: 1 on the East Coast, 1 Central, and 1 Pacific. Again, it was about 10,000 videos that were analyzed, so it was a massive data analysis that took about 3 years to conduct. And the skills were representative of the skills in the previous literature. So it's similar to what is taught at most police academies across the US as far as defensive and control tactics go. And they were taught in a similar manner to how other academies across the nation teach their skills. So these results are probably pretty representative of police academies across the US. So, and similar results might be expected if you were to conduct these types of studies at different academies. All right, the key findings. An initial training, an initial 1 hour physical skills training typically might be expected to result in 60 to 70% proficiency in performing a physical skill. So the way that they go about their training in these single sessions, it just isn't enough. Without practice, the skill performance declines before 2 months. So that suggests that a quarterly retraining might be necessary in police academy training. That's not current standard practice. Current standard practice in police academy training is an annual retraining. So we're talking about a lot more booster training and retraining in police academies if we want to maintain these skills at a high level. In general, police academy instructors, at least in our studies, did not provide enough corrective feedback. There's a heavy focus on the negative or what the cadets are doing wrong, as opposed to gradual shaping and differential reinforcements of what they're doing correctly. So that's something that we would like to see change in police academies and something we're currently working toward. They're teaching far too many skills in way too little time. On average, and across our academies, they were teaching over 100 physical skills in 60 hours. So that equates to about 36 minutes per skill. That's how much time they have to dedicate to teaching physical skills, which as behavior analysts, and if any of you who work with direct care staff or teach crisis management, that sort of thing, you know that 30 minutes is not enough to teach physical skills, at least not to a high proficiency level. The other thing that we found was that there was no correlation between the officer or the cadets' confidence in performing these physical skills and their actual proficiency in performing the skills. So that begs the question, what happens when an officer is not confident in performing these defensive and control tactics? And I would argue that they're more likely to rely on tools such as their baton, a taser, their firearm. I think they're much more likely to go to these tools if they're not really confident in their ability to physically manage subjects. So I think we can, and we've demonstrated that we can do more with the existing resources at police academies. On our training on behavioral principles resulted in substantial increase in both cadets and trainer performance, which is really encouraging. So that leads us to the question of what would happen if we were able to introduce behavioral principles to the entire teacher training curriculum in police academies. And I'll get into how we're moving in that direction a little bit later. All right, so I guess I can pause briefly to see if there are any questions that anyone wants to ask on these studies. I'm going to then get into some additional areas of research and practice that we're engaged with.
There was one question from Caitlin. She said, anyone know of any resources to be used to conduct a training to a police sector asking for information on how to manage those with special needs?
As far as I know, there is not any research, but I have heard of multiple companies attempting to do applied work like that and helping to revise training curriculum around that topic. I'm not aware of any published research, but that's a good question, and it leads really well into the next slide as well. So yeah, if anyone does have that research, please feel free to share it with everyone else.
Perfect. Yeah, Jennifer just shared autismriskmanagement.com. Sounds like it's well known for police for autism. And then Melissa Gillespie asked, how does this account for veteran officers who are going straight to their tools and / or dangerous physical restraints?
How does it account? I don't know that it does account for them. But if you can imagine, officers typically only come in once a year for retraining. So their proficiency and their, what I was just talking about in the last few slides, their confidence in using those skills. I can't imagine that it's incredibly high if you're only coming in to practice those skills once a year. And opportunities to actually engage and use those skills are actually relatively rare in policing. A lot of what they do is spent with routine traffic stops. They're not using these skills as often as a lot of their other traffic stop skills or all of the other things that they do day to day. Use of force in police officer encounters with the public accounts for less than 1%. In fact, less than 0.1% of all the encounters that police have with the public. So these defensive and control tactics and use of tasers and firearms and other tools are very rare, which points to the importance of practicing with those tools on a regular basis because we're not actually using them very often on the job.
Okay, and so Alexis kind of has a similar question, maybe related question. Targeting this overt behavior using feedback is great, but how would one go about targeting covert behavior that would increase the likelihood that police officers use other tools such as a baton or taser?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine you're talking about covert rules about interactions that officers might have. Yeah, and targeting those, I mean, in my opinion, I think relational frame theory and acceptance and commitment training or therapy provides a lot of useful tools, but we really need to translate those tools into digestible terms for law enforcement. And that's something I'm currently working on as well. Yeah, I think so. RFT and ACT, I think, could have a substantial impact in that area if we translate our terms and procedures appropriately. hopefully that kind of sort of answers that question. You're getting at covert verbal behavior, I assume. So that would be my approach anyway.
Perfect. And then Philip Grant asked, were there any group contingencies or reinforcement strategies put in place?
One of the academies did have, not for our study, but we observed the rest of the academy. They did have some group contingencies in place and some public posting of performance, which was cool to see. We did not involve any of that in our analyses. Again, so these 3 studies are basically the foundation for applied research in police academies. We needed to observe and see what the current state of affairs was. And our intervention was just a 1-hour training on behavioral principles. So it just sort of lays the foundation for any number of studies on video modeling, group contingencies, public posting of feedback. There's a career worth of applied research here that could be conducted in police academies, but nothing had been done prior to these. So these first studies needed to be pretty basic so that we could get an idea. Well, build relationships and get an idea of what the current state of affairs was. To your point, they do use some of these things, like public posting of performance and group contingencies. If you don't mind, I'll move on to the next piece, which is some additional areas of research and practice that we've engaged in. So some developing areas of research, and this goes to one of the questions earlier. There are a handful of companies that are working to conduct some studies on developmental disabilities, mental health calls, and police officers' response to individuals with disabilities and disorders. So this is behavior analysis, behavior analysts, bread and butter, right? Like this is what we're very well known for. We have a lot of experience in dealing with these individuals. So I think this is the easiest route into collaboration with police academies, is helping them better respond to these types of individuals. Again, great questions from the audience. I think we have a lot to offer in the area of verbal behavior as well, whether it comes to de-escalation, looking and analyzing antecedent behaviors that lead to aggression toward officers, the types of commands that officers are presenting, whether those be alpha versus beta commands. So commands that are very direct and obvious and have no inaccuracies in the details, versus those that are kind of vague, commands that are vague as opposed to very direct and purposeful. And also when it comes to decision making, which was another question that came up, how do officers decide which approach to use with a particular individual? I think we could offer a lot when it comes to interviewing after incidents. So establishing motivating operations to comply with questions, and incorporating things like behavioral momentum in order to get the necessary information during the interviewing process. Again, so I think we have a lot to offer in the area of verbal behavior, but we're going to have to move a little bit past the basic verbal operants, because if you just go in there with tact command intraverbal, it doesn't really do very much for an officer who needs to de-escalate a dangerous situation. And it's difficult to see how those apply to an interview process as well, when an officer is trying to get information from a subject. Firearm safety training, this is something that I've done quite a bit of research in. We conducted functional behavior assessments of unintentional discharges. So this is when officers accidentally fire their weapon, their firearm. What we found was that most of these occur under routine conditions. A lot of them occur at the training range. whether that be during cleaning or clearing of their firearms. So generally speaking, what we found across the course of three peer-reviewed and published studies was that a lot of these are preventable through safety precautions and the information that we gleaned from over 300 reports of unintentional discharges. You can check that series of studies out on our website as well if you'd like. So what we're doing with that are recommendations for firearm safety training. And we're currently developing an infographic that is going to include all of that information. I have some fancy graphics and a really nice layout. And basically what it's going to be is a poster that we can distribute to all of the police academy firearm ranges in the US, but also to public firearm ranges and hunting grounds, because these things do occur. If anyone's ever been to a firing range, you'll see a lot of scuffs on the floor, and you'll see a lot of holes in the ceilings where individuals who go to those ranges accidentally fired their weapons at times that they did not intend to do so. So we're hoping to get this infographic out across the US in a lot of police academy ranges and public ranges. So that'll be coming hopefully sometime in the next year or so. Some developing areas of practice. We were asked to provide expert witness testimony. I can't go into the details of any of those cases, but basically what it comes down to, and I think behavior analysts are very well adapted to analyzing data and looking at the conclusions drawn from that data. And that's essentially what we had to do. There was some data set that was being used to make certain assertions in a trial. And my job was to go in and look at those conclusions and see if they were substantiated by the actual data. So that was my job. And I think that behavior analysts are pretty well suited to do that type of thing. The final one is a statewide consultation. We're currently working with New York State, their Division of Criminal Justice Services. And what they've asked us to do is revise and incorporate behavioral principles throughout their entire teaching and training curriculum. So I'm going to get into a little bit of what that involves. None of this is going to be new to any of the behavior analysts in the audience, but it's very exciting to see that every police academy trainer in the state of New York will now be exposed to these principles. So of course, objective measurement and outcomes, we're working this into the entire training curriculum throughout. So they have a massive booklets on all of the materials that any teacher or trainer has to learn during their coursework. So what we're incorporating throughout is how do you create a task analysis and how do you objectively measure behavior? Of course, we're including behavioral skills training, but what is rationale? What does it look like? What should instruction look like? What's the most effective way to provide instruction? Looking at modeling, different types of modeling, how to go about presenting video models versus physical models, and stressing the importance of practice to mastery and the role of corrective feedback. Is, as you'll remember, one of the big things that we found was that there was a lack of corrective feedback provided by the academy trainers. So throughout all of the New York State training material, there's a heavy focus on corrective feedback, differential reinforcement, and shaping now. So when it comes to modeling, we talk about things like individual and sequential demonstration of the steps. We talk about showing multiple angles so that you're covering all the potential points of view of the skill. We talk about the benefits of providing slow motion versus full speed models, pausing, the ability to pause video models for clarification, and the importance of providing both exemplars, the accurate performance of the skill, and the non-exemplars, so that the learners can differentiate between a correctly and incorrectly performed skill. Again, we're stressing the video capabilities. So what we did with some of our performance feedback was providing directional and rotational cues, which help the learner to understand the movement involved in the skills. Another thing that we're talking about are types of practice, because as I mentioned, it's pretty ubiquitous that training sessions occur in single sessions of about 1 hour. So we talk a lot about the benefits of spacing sessions, having shorter sessions, but more of them. We talk about variability within practice. So you don't want to practice with the same person every time. Oftentimes in police academy training, you're paired up with individuals. So what we want to do is switch up, and we want to practice with people who are shorter than us, taller than us, smaller than us, heavier than us, different genders. You want to get as much variability built in there, because of course, the people that they come in contact with on the street aren't going to be the same, all of the same size and ability. And then we talk about the importance of variability within the training session. So variations of the same skill. You want to perform the skill from the front, from the back, from the left, from the right. You want to be able to perform these skills from any particular starting point. And then we talk about something called interleaved practice. And this term may or may not be familiar to any of the behavior analysts in the audience. This comes from the motor learning literature. And basically what it comes down to is mixing different skills into training sessions. So if you've got skill 1, 2, and 3, you might practice 1, 2, 3, then you might practice 3, 2, 1, then you might practice 2, 3, 1. And you're incorporating different skills. So what this does is promote the ability to move from one skill to another seamlessly. So I can go from a disarming technique to a takedown procedure or a crisis management procedure. It allows them to practice moving from one skill to another seamlessly, and hopefully, at least what the motor learning literature suggests, is that it results in better maintenance and generalization of the skills. So when it comes to corrective feedback, we're focusing heavily on shaping and reinforcement throughout all of the training curriculum and documents that they've developed. Of course, we're focusing on praising genuine efforts and what's done correctly, and providing sequential corrective feedback for the rest. So sometimes what we observe in academies is that they try to give all the feedback all at once. And what we want them to do is, of course, gradually shape and reinforce approximations toward the final goal. So one thing at a time, baby steps is what we often refer to. There does seem to be this sort of misunderstanding of corrective feedback in academy training, in that a lot of the academy trainers don't feel like they need to provide a lot of immediate corrective feedback. But something we're stressing and trying to correct is that, especially for new learners, the immediacy of the corrective feedback is very important. You can fade that feedback as the learners start to get better and better at skills, and they're able to self-correct and problem solve. But for brand new cadets in the academy, the immediacy of that corrective feedback is very important. So this will get into one of the questions that was asked earlier as well. We are promoting and working through all of their training and curriculum documents, and we're introducing the ideas of observational learning, which helps to increase active engagement. It gets cadets watching the other cadets' performance and trying to learn from their fellow their fellow cadets during training. It also helps them to identify mistakes in others' performance of the skills and then apply that to their own performance. We talk about visualization or visual imagining a little bit, and the importance or helpfulness, at least, of mental repetition. So working through the skill in your quote unquote mind and practicing. Covert practice is essentially what this comes down to. Peer mentoring. We also talk a little bit in all of these documents about interteaching and how that allows students to solve problems together, work with one another to figure out what they're doing correctly and what they're doing incorrectly. And we also talk about, which came up earlier, group contingencies, public posting, how to actually develop these. And then we talk about the trainers and the effects of procedural drift and the importance of refresher training for the actual trainers themselves, which was a part of study 3. We're also introducing the idea of behavioral cusps and pivotal behaviors, which are similar to one another, but slightly different. So we're working all of these ideas and basic principles throughout all of their training curriculum. And it's not just for physical skills either. They're going to be, all of these principles and procedures are going to be worked into their classroom teaching, their gymnasium training, their firearms training, all of the tools that the trainers learn about when they're, I should give you a little bit of background. So when trainers are selected to become trainers in police academies, they often have 10 to 20 years of experience as police officers. So this is it's a huge honor to become a police academy trainer. So these are folks who have a massive amount of applied experience in actually using and performing these skills, but they don't have an extensive background in learning how to become a teacher or how to actually train effectively. So what we've been able to do is ensure that all of the teachers and trainers in police academy training across the state of New York will now be exposed to at least basic behavioral principles and procedures, which is really exciting. So what's up next is New York State has asked us to develop a series of online continuing education videos for the police academies and their trainers. So this is going to involve animations and professional voiceover. And of course, the very first video is going to be how to teach a skill. So it's basically going to be behavioral skills training that will be disseminated across the state of New York, which is pretty cool. All right, so I'm always asked, how did we get here? And I do want to leave a few minutes for additional questions, but basically it came down to developing respect, trust, and sharing values with the academies that we worked with. This was a gradual progression. We started back in 2015, and as I've mentioned before, all we wanted to do was find out what the current state of police academy training was and whether or not we could come in and help them make it better. So this led to what I hope will be an entire career worth of applied behavior analytic research in police academies and lots of questions and opportunities for collaboration. So I would say I'm often asked, where can we best help law enforcement? And it's a difficult question because there are so many areas where I think we could help, but it always comes back to, and it's something that behavior analysts always focus on, which is great, we need to provide practical solutions to real world problems. So whatever research or collaboration we're going to do with law enforcement, the findings should be useful and directly beneficial to the people that we're working with. And I think part of the reason law enforcement has not worked with academics all that much in the past is that oftentimes academics come in with a preconceived notion of the research that they want to conduct, and they're not taking the needs of the actual academy into account. So I think the best approach is to ask what problems they have, and then it's on you to figure out how to solve those problems from a behavior analytic approach. So thank you very much. If you'd like to get updates on everything that we're doing, we have a free monthly newsletter on our websites. I do host the Public House podcast, which deals in everything law enforcement and policing related to behavioral science. You can get CEUs for that, and everything is on our website. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Yay, that was fantastic. We do have some questions, John. So Teresa asked, she said her husband's in law enforcement, and over the summer they were doing a lot of work together to really push these needs. And she was able to get some letters and research to the DA in her area. Some of the techniques were taken into consideration and applied. However, I'd like to be able to really engage them with more buy-in as to how herself and other behavior analysts in her area are able to be more involved. So are there any suggestions for building buy-in within the departments or the academies?
Yes. So ways for developing relationships and buy-in. I think the most important piece is having a good understanding of what the job is and what's involved. So you can go on things like ride-alongs and get a real-world experience, but academies and departments often put on things called citizen academies or citizen days, where you can go into a department and they'll provide you with an educational overview of what they do on a daily basis. And they'll oftentimes set up scenarios that you can run through as well. So they'll set up a domestic dispute scenario where you respond as an officer. They'll set up a traffic stop scenario that goes bad and your job is to respond as the officer. And these training days or citizen days are often set up by the academy trainers. So you're getting to talk to and get experience with the people that you want to work with. So I think that's a fantastic way to get more buy-in. It really comes down to understanding their job and how behavioral science can help them. So I hope that you can also do internships. Those are available as well. But basically going and spending time with them and showing that you're really interested in becoming involved is very important for them.
Wonderful. And Jennifer asked, did the police officers have any access to any mental health crisis professionals to call out for assistance when they do get a call and to get some background on it?
Yeah, they do. It really, the sort of overarching conundrum, if you will, in law enforcement is that no one department is the same as the next. So some departments in some cities may have mental health practitioners that go out on those types of calls, whereas others, the officers are expected to take that role. I would say that that's probably more the default. Officers are expected to not only be law enforcement officers, but they are expected to be mental health practitioners, essentially. They have way too many, I feel they have way too many roles and responsibilities kind of wrapped up in one overall job, that being a police officer. And then just to go back to the previous question, actually, never mind, I just lost my place. I'm blanking.
That's okay. We do have a lot more questions I don't think we're going to get through, but we'll try our best. So Michelle asked, how can the training for the academies be extended beyond New York? And were the academies welcoming to you at first?
Yeah. So how can they be extended? We are still in contact with all of those individuals. In fact, we've had trainers on the podcast as well to talk about continuation of those studies and what could what more could be done relevant to those studies. What was the second part of the question?
The second part of the question, were the academies welcoming to you at first?
Yeah, they were. But part of that had to do with the company that I used to work for was pretty well known to those academies. And the other piece, and probably the most important piece, is that one of the authors on our research is a retired police officer. So he had 30 plus years of experience, and a lot of what he did was start those relationships and start the conversation. So it's a good example of behavior analysts working with somebody in the fields in which they're conducting the research. I think that had a huge impact on how we were initially received at the academies, was that we went in there with a police officer as part of the research.
Perfect. Okay, so it is the top of the hour already. An hour flies by when you're learning something pretty cool, huh? So if everyone, thank you so much, John, for your time. I think everyone really enjoyed and just learned something new today. And it seems like you've inspired quite a few people.
Thanks for having me. Anyway, I'm happy to answer those questions. You can send them through our website.
Perfect. Yes. So so just make sure if you are here for CEUs, there is that sign out link. Make sure to sign out within 5 minutes of the end of this presentation, which is like 6 minutes past the hour. But other than that, maybe we can ask, Dr. O'Neill to come back for like a part 2 to see where all his research is going at that point. So so everyone, that is the end of our presentation today. Take care. Have a great, amazing weekend. That's well deserved. And go change the world, everyone. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, John.
No problem.